Hi, thanks for coming again to the Omelas to Carcasa channel. And I do hope that if you're still watching this whilst, as it's published, the lockdown is going on, then I wish you great safety and comfort. I thought we'd have a chat today about objectives. And rather than identifying that you should have objectives as an actor, because that's pretty established now, no matter what kind of performing that you're doing, you're going to have to, as an actor, or even any kind of practitioner, if you're in performance in any way, establish what your objectives are. Now, for now, I'm going to keep it exclusively to naturalistic performing, and as such, character objectives. Non-naturalistic plays still have objectives. Anything where you're not playing a character, there is still objectives, but they're of a different kind. So we're just going to talk about performing scripted, realism-driven plays where there's any kind of psychological realism at all, and how to establish character objectives. Now, regardless of what kind of school of acting you're likely going to be taught from, you may be following a emotion-driven, what is usually described or defined as method acting approach, or whether you're taking a what tends to be called method of physical actions approach, so internal versus external. The one thing that they have in common is that you're still going to be focusing on the will, focusing on what does your character want, what are the basic facts, given circumstances, tactics, and objectives of the character. They are true no matter what approach of the two main approaches to naturalism or performing a realistic character. They both require objectives, and they require good objectives, and it's your job as an actor to choose and plan what those objectives down to an individual unit level at least are. I'm just going to talk through some tips for choosing good objectives, some warnings for how bad objectives get taught. And the first thing to say is that what should inform your objectives, what should inform your determination of what does my character want at this particular moment in the play, which is what an objective is. Two things need to inform, and one comes from underneath, which is what is the circumstance, what is the context right now, and what is the context coming from over the top, which is what is my character's overall intentions. And that's the first thing I'm going to say is something that comes from the top, because that's the one that's more prone to being ignored. You should not be, where you can, and certainly not where you're doing a rehearsed scripted play, determining your objectives without having established what your super objective is. And we'll have a separate video about choosing a good super objective. You can't really establish what your character wants in an individual moment without knowing what your character wants in the long term and what drives them in life. Not to a useful extent. And we'll talk about usefulness in a moment. You need to have established what is your super objective. Ideally, what is your scene objective? Or, because your character doesn't know they're in a scene, I don't usually like the term scene objective, think of it more in terms of what do I want from this situation before I leave the room, is the easiest way from your character's perspective to think about it. What is your character looking for in general from this person by the time this interaction finishes, or by the time you or they leave the room? So it has to be determined by your prior understanding of the character. You can only determine your super objective after you have done an analysis of the text of the play, which again will be a context of a different video. So without those pieces of information, it's really hard to get a good objective, particularly for a rehearsed play. Again, TV, working in an audition scenario, for instance, where you're just generating dialogue out of nowhere, those are different things, and that's where the undercurrent comes in, which is what is this individual scenario? What is all the information about what, the context of why am I here? Why is the person or the people that are also here here? And what do, so what can I want now? What can I realistically achieve from the perspective of my character from this person right now? How do I want them to behave? And always think in terms of a result. Don't think in terms of you, think in terms of them. How do I want them to behave? What is my behaviour's impact on them supposed to be? The next thing is that they must help you as an actor, by which I mean they need to give you a template for your behaviour and for you to play. Now that seems like a really obvious thing, but the number of people who, let's take the following line, where are the bodies buried? That's your line in the play. Where are the bodies buried? Now, a really, really bad actor, or at least one who doesn't know how to choose objectives, will choose the following objective that I've seen in thousands of examples. I want to know where the bodies are buried. Line, where are the bodies buried? Objective, I want to know where the bodies are buried. That's not a good objective. And it's not a good objective because it is totally unplayable in any kind of subtextual way. And don't forget, if you think about the session going back to units and thoughts, the thought itself already establishes that you want to know where the bodies are buried. The scene objective might be that you want to know where the bodies are buried, although it's likely to also include some indication as to why you want that for yourself. But just asking where the bodies are buried and saying, I want to know where the bodies are buried, gives you nothing as an actor. Do you want this person to feel scared? I want this person to feel scared of me. That is a viable objective in that moment. Again, what do you want them to do? I want to establish whether they do know whether the bodies are buried somewhere or not. That's a viable objective in that moment, because that gives you something to play beyond the line. I want them to mentally break. I want them to laugh. I want them to think that I actually don't know whether they know the situation. I want them to think that I know nothing. I want them to think that I know something. Those are all much more playable objectives that make your character far richer in that moment and are easier than I want to know where the bodies are buried, which gives you nothing to play as an actor. So always think in terms of what is going to help me, always think in terms of what is the results to them, and never use your objective to essentially just describe what you're already doing. Open the door, objective, I want the door to be opened. It's of no use whatsoever. It's there for you wanting to use it as a, if you like, an exercise, a technical exercise. You're not using it for your own rehearsal purposes. How do you establish objectives when you're not talking? Maybe how do you establish objectives when you're not even the primary focus of the scene? Now, this is kind of a little subcategory of what we're talking about, but this is where establishing your super objective is really useful. A lot of people have asked me over the years, kind of, well, what do I do when I'm not even necessarily listening to, or when I'm not involved in the main action that's going on stage? Well, those are the moments that give you lots of recourse for play and to go to your super objective. Let's say your we'll use a really basic super objective, but a viable one, which is something like, I want to be as physically comfortable as I can be at all times. Then within the parameters of the scene, based on where you are, maybe then that gives you 2 or 3 units to play an objective of, I want to figure out whether I am going to be able to get away with sitting down. Then I want to sit down without anybody else noticing, and then I want to determine whether anybody has seen me sitting down or not. And then maybe even from there, I want to establish whether I can get away with lying down, or I want to pull a sandwich out of my bag without anybody noticing. No, those are the sort of things that you can do. Again, if you are, and you can do that as spear carrier number 3, but at a much, much lower level. You know, replace sitting down for slouching a bit. If you are spear carrier number 3 and you are not being asked to engage directly with the immediate action that's on stage. Or if you're in a musical theatre ensemble and you are not meant to be particularly engaging with the main character. Or even if you're just doing extras work. And that's the sort of thing that you can play with absolutely all the time. And have free reign until you're told not to do that by the director, and explore what those viable opportunities are. But if you are talking, or if you are engaged in the main action, then think in terms of result. You know, even when I was talking there about I want to be able to sit down, that requires me to be engaging in the outside world to see if I can get away with it, or to revel in my physical comfort once I have sat down. Anyway, so we'll talk about super objectives at a future time, because they are so important too. But I hope that's been useful. So again, primary tips: think both over and under. Think in terms of the immediate context and the over context of who your character is. Never use an objective to describe what you're doing, and make sure that it's applicable. And focus on the result, preferably the behavioural result of the other person or people involved in the scene. Okay, I'll leave you there. Stay safe, all the very best, and thank you for watching.